Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Dark Duo. I am Kosette.
And I am Ty.
We are a new true crime podcast, and we are going to encompass the cases of murder, mysterious disappearances, and we will also cover hauntings, anything spooky, dark, and secretive. We will drop episodes every single week on a Monday, and every single month we are going to have a different theme that we will cover. I am excited to share with you that for March, we are going to be covering fairy tales. If you want to follow our cases or see pictures, we are going to upload these posts onto our Instagram at thedarkduo_podcasts, and we will post all the pictures on them. With that being said, let's introduce ourselves a little bit. As I said before, I'm going to be your host, Kosette Spencer.
And I'm Ty, the co-host.
Let's go ahead and just jump right in. Imagine you're in a forest from the road that leads to your house. It's about a mile walk, and it's after school. You just get dropped off of the bus. There's a bend in the path. You see your mom through the window. You waved her. It's been a long day at school. You're super excited to see her. You go into some bushes, and you're never seen again. It's like you just vanished into thin air. Today, we will be covering the case of Muriel Drinkwater, which was also known as the Little Red Riding Hood murders. And this is the scene that I just laid out for you. I want you to imagine was not just her imagination. This was her actual reality. To start, we are going to give some trigger warnings. This is an episode, and we are going to discuss the beating of a child, rape of a child, and a murder of a child. So please listen with care. Our sources for this episode are findagrave.com, BBC News UK, walesonline.co, herald.wales, crimeandmemorial.com, and thedailymail.co.uk, and Dark Land Hunting the Killers movie. All right, to begin. Muriel Joanne Drinkwater was born on July 19th, 1933 in Carmarthen, Wales. She was the youngest of four sisters. She was born to Margaret and John Percival. They lived in Pentrgar, Wales, and they had a family farm that they called Tyle Dew Farm. Locally, Muriel was known as the Little Nightingale because she had a beautiful singing voice, and 12-year-old Muriel Drinkwater was a choir girl who had dreams of becoming a school teacher. However, she would never be able to reach these goals. On the day of June 27th, 1946, Muriel was seen singing in the school bus with friends after a long day of school. Muriel attended the school of Gowerton County School, and her bus was dropped off near the side of the road, which was near the family's farm in Swansea. Muriel was dropped off at 14:30 British Summertime, also known as BST. This also would have been 2:30 for those of us that don't know military time. She skipped and sang her way down the mile-long path that led from the road, as she did every single day after school. This path ran through the woods and then ran into her family's farm. Along the path, she ran into a 13-year-old neighbor, which was a boy who went by the name Hubert Hoyles. Hubert was on the path away from the farmhouse, after he had just bought eggs from Muriel's mother, who was named Margaret. Margaret was inside the kitchen making a pot of tea when she spotted Muriel from the kitchen window. Margaret could see Muriel through a gap of trees that was only 500 meters away from the house. This would be roughly 546 yards for those of us that don't know the metric system. Muriel waved to her mother through the kitchen window, and Margaret waved back. Then she saw Muriel disappear around the bend into the path that led into some dense undergrowth. After Muriel did not immediately show up, Margaret was not concerned. She figured that Muriel had gone to play with some friends, gone to someone's house, that she'd be home in a little bit. After hours passed, there was still no sign of Muriel. Margaret started to get worried, so she decided to go down to the village to take a look for her. Margaret later called police, who then organized a search party. Her father was John Percival and led the search party organization by the police to find Muriel. It was said that every man in the village took part in this all-night search. However, it was the police that found Muriel in the woods only a quarter mile from her house. This was at 16:30, or also known as 4:30 p.m. Muriel's body was found fully dressed in her school clothes. This included a bright red coat that she was wearing. This is what dubbed her as the Little Red Riding Hood murder. Muriel was found with one hand raised above her head, the other down, and her eyes were still wide open. 12-year-old Muriel had been bludgeoned in the head, raped, and shot in the chest 2 times.
Easy.
Officers collected the evidence from the crime scene, which included the coat she was found wearing. And they started the legwork of trying to find the killer. Sources stated 2 different facts. One stated that the gun was found near the body, but another source stated it was found 2 days after the body, but in the same place as the body. So, not sure which is true, conflicting statements there, but either way, the gun that was used at the crime scene for that same day or 2 days later was found. The gun was a Colt 45, which is an automatic pistol, and it was first issued for World War I and was commonly issued to the American Army. However, the police think that this gun was used in World War II, and this gun still had the original wooden stocks next to the grip for motorized with perspex. The weapon used to bludgeon her was never recovered or never found. We can assume that the killer took the piece of evidence with them, buried it, or probably tossed it somewhere as to not be found. The question we have is why the killer left the gun but took the weapon that was used to bludgeon Muriel. By the killer leaving the gun, this did not give any insights into who the killer was. Near the crime scene, the police also found cigarette butts and lolly wrappers. This insinuated to the police that whoever had killed Muriel had been waiting for her to walk by. They put together her last moments, and they think that the killer was likely watching her as she walked into the woods, and she knew she was going to be in the woods at that time. He waited in the undergrowth and captured her the second he got the chance. After Muriel had gone into the dense undergrowth, she was then pulled from the path into the woodland that was beside it, attacked in the undergrowth, where she was then bludgeoned in the head, raped, and shot 2 times in the chest with the Colt 45. The findings that we got from the post-mortem exam showed that Muriel died from the gunshot wound to the chest and the head injury. These are what essentially ended her life. The gun that was used had been the same weapon that was used also in a recent murder that was found in Bristol. The officers from the Glamorgan force was helped by the Scotland Yard detectives. 4 days after the findings, the gun that the police issued thousands of notice asking to receive help from the public. They handed out photos of the gun and for people to be a good citizen and to inform them if they knew of anything that would help the investigation. In the following days and the following weeks, the police officer visited every single farmhouse or cottage that was within the area of 150 square miles, which is good on police. Along with this, the police interviewed and investigated 20,000 men in Swansea, Aberdare, and Carmarthenshire. Even with this groundwork being covered by police, though, they were still unable to find and bring the killer to justice. Hubert, who was the little boy that was on the trail when Muriel was coming back from school, he was buying eggs. He was brought in by the police and questioned. He had been dubbed as their prime suspect, and they wanted to pin him since he was on the trail and the last to talk to Muriel. He stated that he had not seen anyone else along the path besides Muriel. He said he had not passed anyone else and that it was just him and Muriel. However, he did state that he had seen a man on the path a few weeks earlier prior to the crime. Hubert said that the man was in his 30s and he had a local accent. The man was well dressed and had thick, fluffy hair, according to him. He also stated that the man was wearing light brown sports jacket and brown corduroy trousers. The man that Hubert had seen was behind some bushes and then asked Hubert what he was doing and told Hubert that he should get going. Even with this description, though, and the ground that the police covered, the killer was still not found. The Western Mail had done a report on Muriel's parents, and they said that they had been thinking of moving, but had not done so because Muriel was so happy in school. She was said to have been a brilliant scholar. The funeral for Muriel Drinkwater was held on the 2nd of July of 1946. At this funeral, the attendance was 3,000 people who came to give their regards and wishes to the Drinkwater family. Many of these who came were women and young children who had traveled from miles away. As her coffin was carried into the church, her family and classmates sang, "There's a home for little children." The chief constable had sent a wreath, and many of the women who attended the funeral carried posies, bays, and flowers, which were placed on the grave afterward. Her parents were devout members of their faith and held the funeral at their church, which was the St. David's Church in Penningrove. However, after Muriel's funeral, the parents never went to church again. Muriel's great-niece had stated that somehow they could never bring themselves to go. Claire had also stated that this turned the family upside down. The Drinkwaters moved to England shortly after and left their home. All right, that's technically our whole story of Muriel. How are we feeling?
So they never found the actual killer.
No. But they took DNA evidence from her.
And never found anything.
No. But it's also 1946. There's not. DNA evidence is not even a thought. Like being able to process DNA.
What's crazy is they interviewed, what did you say, 20,000 men?
Yeah, 20,000 men.
And they didn't have a single lead.
No.
A single suspect that was worth interrogating again.
No. And the only thing they found was from Hubert, who said that there had been someone along the path a couple weeks earlier.
Yeah, a couple weeks prior.
But he didn't know who it was. Who do we think it is? Do you have any?
It has to be someone that she knows, I think.
Okay.
But I don't know.
We'll keep going.
Okay.
Okay. Let's move more into the investigation and the suspects. So, police believe that Hubert was their guy. I said that earlier because he was there at the crime scene moments before it happened.
But he's 13 years old.
Yes, but as bad as it is, children can kill children. Happens more than you think.
Yeah, but okay.
Okay. They think he's their guy, though. He was there. He was the last to talk to her, last to see her, even after his mom. So, during their initial investigation, they never officially cleared him from being their suspect. They also believe that 12-year-old Muriel might have been the victim of a current serial killer in the area of 1946. This serial killer was named Harold Jones. Harold Jones was a suspect to be a notorious serial killer in the 1940s, and he was dubbed as Jack the Stripper because of how he left his victims. Not to be confused with Jack the Ripper. This was in the 1880s.
That's just what I was about to ask.
No, he's not Jack the Ripper.
Okay.
He was Jack the Stripper because of how he would leave his victims.
I've never heard of him before.
Yeah, he would leave them completely stripped clean of clothing and just leave them in their place.
Okay.
So, Harold Jones was only 15 years old when he gruesomely murdered an 8-year-old named Freda Burnell in Arbitellery, Wales. He had been arrested for following this murder, for many locals believed that he had been framed by the detectives out in London. He was acquitted of his crimes, and then days later, he murdered Freda's friend as well, who was 11-year-old Florence Little. He was again arrested. He actually confessed to both murders. And then, his reason for killing was simply put as a desire to kill, which is not a good reason. Then again,
pretty dark.
Yeah. Then again, no reason's good enough to kill someone.
No.
Jones was not sentenced to death due to his age of being under 16, which at the time, if you were under 16, you could not be held and put to death. He was then sentenced to 20 years in jail, which he dutifully served. And after his time in jail, he joined the army, arrived back in Wales, seemed to have turned his life around. He arrived in Wales just 4 months prior to when Muriel was killed.
So he served 20 years in jail, so he got out about, what, 35?
Yes.
Roughly. Isn't that what the kid on the path said? That he saw a man in his 30s weeks prior to Muriel's death, right?
I believe so.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure he said he was around his 30s.
Okay, I'm just putting 2 and 2 together.
Yes. So, he was there 4 months prior to when she was killed. However, even with all this background story, they still had no physical evidence that would tie Jones to the murder. Muriel's name was all over the headlines, but also no breakthrough was made as the girl's murder started to slip from the headlines and then remained cold for decades and was untouched. This case remained cold from the 1940s until it was reopened in 2003, so roughly 60 years later.
Yeah.
A detective on the case was looking through the files, and he noticed that in the report there had been a semen stain found on her coat, which we know there wasn't testing, obviously, in the 1940s.
Yeah.
So in that time, it couldn't have been tested. They probably forgot about it. Whatever, they didn't think they could do anything with it. Then, they couldn't find matches in those days. It was cold. Mm-hmm. DNA testing began in 1977 by Alec Jeffers and was the first used in a case that was used in 1986. So, this is starting to come around. They're starting to maybe connect some dots. The coat they had bagged for evidence, no one was sure where it was, though. They couldn't remember where they put it. They knew that they had evidence on it, but they were not sure where it got put. So, this was essentially a dead end. They thought that they could test the coat for the semen stain, but they don't know where the coat's at. They lost it. Which, it's 60 years, but also at the same time, it's a cold case. You should still keep things organized, but...
Yeah, but, 60 years later, who's going to... As terrible as it sounds, who's going to hold on to a coat?
Yeah, but
in the evidence room.
But if it was a coat that was used in someone's murder...
Yeah, that's just a lot of evidence to hold on to.
Yeah, but if they just chucked out everyone's evidence, no cases would get solved.
Yeah.
Anyways, so this was a dead end. Case ran cold again for another roughly 5 years. In 2008, along came a retired DCI Bethel's cold case team, who worked for the police department. Bethel comes in one day and she says, I found the original clothing, and we know, even though it has been 60 years that it went into storage, that this is Muriel's. Her name was written in the copper plate, Muriel J. Drinkwater. So we found our coat.
Perfect.
This coat had been found in a very dark corner of the storeroom in the police station. A circle had been marked into the back of the coat by the original police who first investigated this crime scene. The semen stain on the coat was invisible to the naked eye, and they were unsure if they'd be able to extract anything at all from it. Luckily, though, forensic experts were able to pull a partial DNA profile from it and had found the semen stain on the lower flap of Muriel's coat. By this, being able to pull a partial DNA profile made Muriel J. Drinkwater's case the oldest case of its kind for DNA profiling to have worked. So this is the oldest case that DNA profiling was used and worked. Okay. This coat was also thought to be the oldest piece of crime scene evidence with a semen stain on it in the world. They were also able to still pull a partial DNA profile from the oldest piece of evidence in the world. So our police did their job. They did really good in this case. So think about the coat. It's 60 years old. It's the oldest piece of evidence, and they can pull that DNA profile. Forensic scientists were 100% certain that it was the killer's stain without a shadow of a doubt. And after pulling the partial DNA profile, the police finally were able to clear Hubert from being a suspect.
Good.
So our 13-year-old boy wasn't killer. Wasn't him. This finally cleared the cloud of suspicion that had been looming over him, though, for over half a century, which I'm sure was a huge relief to him. To be publicly cleared and having to live like that for 60 years thinking that people thought you probably killed her was probably so hard. When he knew he didn't do it.
Yeah, when he's 73 years old, get acquitted for the murder.
Yeah. Not acquitted, but
proved innocent. Yeah.
Yeah. Cleared as a suspect.
Yep.
So they were also able to clear Harold Jones that we talked about earlier from the case as well, because he was still convicted of other double child murders from the 1920s. So both of these clearings had been actually a disappointment for Muriel's niece Margaret, who is alive now. In 2008, Margaret had said that the murder of her mom's sister had a massive effect on her mother and her family. They would just like to put it to rest, and they still need justice for Muriel. However, justice might still be coming. In the documentary, The Dark Land: Hunting the Killers, they point the finger at a new suspect by the name of Ronnie Harris. In 1953, he murdered two of his relatives, who were John and Phoebe Harris, who had lived on a farm just west of Carmarthen. He had hit John on the head with a hammer, which killed him, and then he hit Phoebe with the same hammer on the head before burying her alive.
Whoa.
So, same MO. He bludgeoned them in the head. Same as what happened to Muriel. He was the last man sentenced to death in Carmarthen and was the second to last man who was hung in Swansea. So before his death, it was thought that he committed other murders, but nothing had ever been proven. He had also been given an interesting interview, to say the least, before his execution. It went something like this. He stated, "I deny the killing of my relatives at all, and I can't understand why people would think that I killed them." He also stated that he fixates on the fact that I'm married to a younger woman and she's 5 years younger than I am, and she's still going to school and she's very brilliant. This seemed a little odd to everyone and rubbed everyone kind of the wrong way, just because of the fact that he was so interested in telling everyone he had a young girl. She was a cute little schoolgirl. She was clever. She was in grammar school. Everything just seemed a little odd. It was also stated that Muriel had passed her 11 plus to get into grammar school. So same as his little girl, which is the kind of girl he had the liking for, right? So kind of, again, similar weird similarities. This documentary also brings up a newspaper article from this time that stated Harris was a farmhand who had worked for Muriel's father at the time of her murder as well. So he was often around. An interview with Harry's cousin Lynn Hughes stated that he was 9 at the time and he was twice his age, but he felt intellectually superior to Harry's. Even though he was simpleton, he didn't seem to detect him to be like a menace. He just thought he was simple-minded. The police took DNA from Harry's relatives, but nothing publicly has been stated if the DNA that they took was a match to the DNA that was left on Muriel's coat. So, our last suspect that we're going to talk about is Muriel's father, John. During the initial course of the investigation, the police had pinned John as a suspect. After research, they were able to track down Martin Phillips, who was a relative of Muriel and was 6 at the time of the murder. He agreed to give a DNA sample to rule out Muriel's father, and Martin remembered a young girl who was always so full of life and always skipping and always singing. He said this tragedy still haunts the family to this day and that his grandparents have been completely changed from this. They never recovered from this tragedy in their family, so This case currently, as of 2025, almost 80 years later, is unsolved. The DNA that was taken from Harry's family and from Muriel's family has never been publicly stated if either were a match or not a match. And that was like almost 20 years ago. The Southwest Police stated all historic murder cases, often referred to in the media as cold cases, are allocated to the Specialist Crime Review Unit and remain under active consideration and will be the subject of reinvestigation as and when new information is received, or when there are advances in forensic science, and that each case is reviewed either periodically or when information comes in from the public or other forces to make them act on it. But that concludes the case and is still under what they state to be active consideration. So, how are you feeling, Ty?
Honestly, I don't know.
Are there any suspects that you're leaning towards? One that you think it could be, or you think that it's someone completely that we aren't even a suspect?
I have it narrowed down to two.
Okay.
I think it was the boy that killed his mom and his dad.
Okay.
That was a farmhand at her family farm.
So Harry's.
I think he's one of the suspects.
Okay.
And then the other guy that killed the other two little girls that went to jail for 20 years, then was released a couple months before her murder.
Yes. The guy that was dating the little schoolgirl, right?
No. I don't remember his name, but he killed the two little girls, went to jail for 20 years, was released at like 35, and then...
Jones.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That one. Those are my two suspects.
Interesting.
But...
Do you think it's the dad?
No.
At all?
I don't think it's the dad.
I don't either.
No.
Especially because he moved. But it is a little weird that he did move after the case, because he wanted to put space between him and the crime scene, which could be seen as odd.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, if I was in his shoes, I would want to move too. I wouldn't want to walk down that road and know that was where my daughter was murdered.
That's true. That's very true. All right, so this is the last information that I have on this case. It is still considered to be open, and with no information on who the DNA matches to, it's considered to also be cold. This case feels so unfair in the way that it's been 80 years, and Muriel's family still does not have answers or any closure to this case. There has not been justice for this family, and there has not been a convicted killer for this family to feel like justice was served. Muriel never made it past the age of 12 years old because her life was cut short. Yet, her murderer has lived the last 80 years scot-free, no issues, and may have even lived his whole life out by now, and might not even be alive, but he lived his whole life carefree. As we go through today, I would like us to think of Muriel Drinkwater, and think of the girl who was full of life, who was the town's nightingale, and was the girl who was always skipping, singing, and always happy. All right, listeners, let's hear your thoughts. You can leave them in the comments. We also asked, follow us on the Dark Duo _podcast on Instagram. Also, if you have case suggestions that you would like us to cover, leave them in the comments or DM them to us. Or you can also email them to us at thedarkduopodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next week with a new episode.